So just to cover the sort of agenda really for today's session, we should last about sort of 45 minutes, 50 minutes. I'll start by giving you just a very brief overview of our reading tutoring program to make sure you all understand how the tutoring works. I know we've got a mix of people on this session. We've got some people who maybe already have or are using the tutoring program in schools. There'll be other people on this session who have never seen or used our tutoring program at all. So I'll just sort of get everybody up to speed on how our tutoring program works, and that will really help you then understand the impact. And then Eliza is going to sort of look at the main bit of today's session, which is really looking at the impact that the tutoring is having on reading skills and attainment, and looking at all the data that we've got from the National Tutoring Programme, which is huge. We've been running this tutoring programme now. We're in the third year of the National Tutoring Programme. We're by far the largest provider of reading, in fact, reading tutoring to primary schools in the UK. So we have more data and information on how children are catching up their reading skills through the National Tutoring Programme than probably anyone else. And then I'll just finish off. There may be some of you here or some of you that may still have funding left for the National Tutoring Programme. I'll just explain how that works. And if you're interested in doing some more tutoring, we'll make sure you've got all that information at the very end. So let's just start with just explaining how the tutoring program works. So it is just a reading tutoring program. It specializes on helping children to improve their reading skills. We don't cover other subjects. It can be used right through the primary phase from year 1 to year 6. It works very well across all of those year groups. We have content that is suitable for those pupils, and it's being used in over 35,000 pupils now in over 650 schools across NTP, and that number increases week in, week out. The tutoring is probably the best way we describe it is blended. So it is face-to-face tutoring, which is really important in the primary phase. So we don't have a remote tutor. The tutor will be sitting down with the children, delivering the tutoring face-to-face, but they are supported, the children and the tutor is supported by an online platform that has all of the structured activities and content which are used to improve reading skills. So it brings the best of the online resources and activities with a face-to-face tutor that is working with the children. Assessments are really important. You'll be seeing those in a minute with Eliza's impact data. We assess pupils at the beginning, throughout the tutoring, and also at the end. It's a very flexible program where children can work in sort of pairs for the tutoring. So most schools will be tutoring pupils in either groups of 2, 4 or 6. Some children can work in a sort of one-to-one mode as well, but certainly it's very efficient to deliver. And actually children benefit by working cooperatively and reading with a partner as they do the tutoring. So actually working together in a pair works very well. Daily tutoring is the most effective, and we encourage schools to try and do as many sessions each week. So 3 or 4 sessions are sort of recommended minimum. It's certainly not a program that you just want to use once a week to make the rapid impact that Eliza will be showing you in a minute. Daily tutoring is really important, and children need that to build up their reading skills and confidence. Most schools will do tutoring across 15 hours. That's the National Tutoring Programme funding allocation. There is evidence behind that number. We know that the sort of a minimum of 15 hours tutoring has a big impact regardless of what that tutoring is and different subjects. So there's good research from EEF and others that the 15 hours tutoring is a sort of minimum baseline. There will clearly be some children that need more tutoring than that, but we'll have a look at the impact in a minute of the progress of those pupils who do a minimum of 15 hours tutoring where they get to. And then the final one, just to sort of stress, and this has probably changed over the years actually, there is a very flexible way now in who can actually deliver the tutoring. So the National Tutoring Programme funding, which is used by most schools who do our tutoring programme, can allow you to fund your in-school tutors, your own staff, to be a tutor. And many schools do that now, particularly this year. You can have an external tutor, so FFT or someone else can provide a tutor to come into your school to deliver the tutoring, And many of the schools that do our tutoring program use one of our tutors. We have a large pool of qualified teachers who do tutoring for us all the time, and we place those in schools for 6 weeks. Some schools are using an academic mentor as well, so that's almost a full-time sort of graduate level tutor based in your school. So there's real flexibility now on how you can deliver the tutoring, and the funding, importantly, allows you to choose the best mix of that for your school. And our program works with all of those. Improving reading is a complex activity and a complex task for teachers and schools. We all know that learning to read isn't straightforward for most people. If it was, we probably wouldn't be here today. We would need lots of resources and thought about it, but it does need a number of fairly complex things to come together for children to be able to learn to read. It's really important that children have got the very basic phonics skills and decoding skills to be able to read words accurately and segment and blend. Fluency is a really important bridge then of moving from just being able to read a word to actually be able to read a word fluently and to read a passage fluently and apply those decoding skills to ever more complex texts, and to really sort of release cognitive resources that are not just solely focused on decoding but can read fluently, and then really allow children to focus on the end point, which is reading comprehension, and being able to think about the meaning and understanding of the text that they're reading, and to use that reading to support their learning. So our reading tutoring program has activities that cover all of those areas: decoding, fluency, and comprehension. This sort of slide will be quite helpful when Eliza starts talking about the impact a bit later. So as I say, most children will do their tutoring over around about 6 weeks. Most of them will have either daily sessions or 3 or 4 sessions a week. They'll be working in pairs, and that's how they get to 15 hours. They're doing sort of half a day every day for 6 weeks would be 15 hours tutoring for a child. They always do an assessment at the start. That's really important to see where their reading is now, and helps us place them at the right point and pair them up with other children to start the tutoring. They then do assessments as we go through the program. So pretty much every week, perhaps even more regularly than that, they'll do what we call a short tutor check, and that's just a little one-to-one assessment with the tutor where we can monitor their reading skills, and that gives us even more data to track progress. And then we encourage schools to do a final reading assessment as well, so that you've got that sort of baseline and endpoint to see where the children are. And that data is some of the data that Eliza will be looking at in a bit. We have lots of content and stories that make up our tutoring program. So we have up to 100 stories going from reception right through to year 6. Those are stories that cover sort of phonics skills in a systematic sequence at the start. And then once you're past that sort of phonics stage, they move into other texts that progress in difficulty and complexity. You can see there that we have a systematic progression for our phonics sort of early stories. So this is really important. Obviously, most of the children doing the tutoring will have had their first phonics teaching already. So they might be in year 2 or year 3 where they've done their phonics, but actually they're needing to revisit some sounds, or they're still not fully mastered. They perhaps haven't passed their phonics screening check. So the approach we're taking to teach the phonics skills is entirely consistent with how any systematic phonics program will do that. So let's just have a quick look at some of the sort of activities before I hand over to Eliza. So the first thing to show you is how the initial assessment works. We do an initial assessment that has a combination of decoding and reading fluency. So the tutor or whoever's doing this assessment will sit down with a child and we'll ask them to read the words that come up on the screen. And we'll just be clicking right or wrong as the child reads these words. There are a set of words that sort of get progressively more difficult, and we're testing out lots of the GPCs to try and work out which words they can accurately decode or not. Once they get through the sort of phonics sequence of words, they move on to then some more complex words. We've used national curriculum sort of example words from sort of year 2 through to year to year 6 there. It won't go on forever. Clearly, once a child is starting to get a number of words wrong, we then pause. We don't make them read hundreds of words that they can't do. So it's a sort of semi-adaptive assessment that will, once we've got to a point where we think actually the child has sort of read as many words as they're going to, we will pause that bit. We then give them a reading fluency passage. We have a whole bank of reading fluency passages, and we choose one that is appropriate based on the words where they've got to with their decoding. And this is just a very quick 1-minute timed read. So the passage will come up on the screen. The child will just simply read through this passage. The tutor or the assessor will click on any words that the child's getting wrong. And at the end of the minute, it will stop. So it's just a 1-minute assessment. And what we get at the end is some really useful information, which allows us to for the tutor really, and for you to decide where to place the child. So this is suggesting here, based on their decoding, this child would start on story number 25. We've also factored in their reading fluency, their words correct per minute. And that will give us sort of starting point as well. And we can use both of those to decide exactly where to place that child. The fluency here is just an example. We've done it rather quickly. So you would look at both the reading fluency and their sort of decoding sort of accuracy, and the tutor will make a suggestion, and the platform will make a suggestion of where to start there. So that data is really useful. It's really useful for our sort of impact as well, because we know where they are at the start and in those early stories, and we can see the progress they make with both decoding and fluency. So once they've done that, the children will pair up. They're ready to start the tutoring. We have 6 activities. I'm not going to go through all 6 now. I'll just go through a couple of them and show them to you. Power Reader is the one they'll probably do first of all. This activity is all about practicing their reading, and they're improving their reading fluency. So it's an opportunity for them to read a story. They can choose a story. They will read through the story working in pairs, reading a page each, and have first of all a practice read through the story. So they'll be working with partners. One partner will read a page, then their other partner, and so on. They'll go through and do a practice read through, and then they have a little timed read each. So we'll each read a short, a sort of section of the story, and an opportunity to practice their reading fluency. And if their reading fluency sort of is in line with what we expect, they get sort of bonus points and that sort of thing. And the children really enjoy that. We then have some phonics activities. I won't go through them all one by one, but for children who are still at the phonics stage, we have an activity that practices the GPCs. So the children will read the GPCs that are coming out on the screen. Their partner will check whether they've got it right. So ow, or o. And then their partner will say whether that's right or wrong. So that's very straightforward. And with a lot of these activities, they have to get a certain number correct to be able to progress through. So if you only got half of these letters and sounds correct, they would have another go at the activity to sort of embed their knowledge. Word Blender works in exactly the same way, but obviously this time we're looking at words, and you can see the sort of it's interesting, actually. This is probably one of the hardest GPCs that children find to read, the your sound. It's not a particularly common one, but it is in letters and sounds. There are words. So they have to, they will read now full words that come up on the sure, and check that. If they need help with blending and segmenting, they can do that. They can get the clue, and we'll stretch out the word and segment it and help them through that. Spelling is important. People wonder, well, why do we have spelling in a reading program? But actually it's really important that the children can both read words on screen, but they can do the opposite. They can hear a word and then assemble the letters in the right order to be able to write the word and really cement their knowledge. So in this case, the word is secure, and they have to use the tiles here at the bottom of the screen to spell the word. If they make a mistake or they're struggling with their spelling, we will the system will give them a prompt. So you can see here they've made a mistake, we'll prompt them the next word. So funny enough, this is one of the most popular activities. Children really enjoy the spelling. I think they like using the keyboard. And then the final 2 activities move on to comprehension. So we have word quest is an activity where they look at the meaning of the words and the vocabulary they're learning. There's a nice sort of close activity in there where they have to complete a sentence and do that. If I can sort of show that to you at the very end, I'll just move quickly there. So here's an example where so they've got 2 words to choose from. They've got a sentence. They need to choose the correct word and put that in there. And then finally, story quest is the activity they do right at the end. So they've done the other 5 activities, and now it pulls it all together, and they read this new story. It's called In the Pool. And while they're reading, they have to answer some comprehension questions.
It's Cool in the Pool. Written by Elizabeth Charman. Illustrated by Adam Lee.
So just skip through. So they start reading the story together. They'll do this in pairs. So they'll be taking it in turns, reading a page each and answering the questions. So they read a page. They then will have some comprehension questions to answer. And again, they have to get a certain number of these right to be able to finish the story. If they need to go back to the text, they can do that. It's not meant to be a sort of memory test. So if they're looking at a question and don't know the answer, did you jump first? Well, if they need to, they can go back to the story to check where they are. So that's the last bit of tutoring. They finish off the story by reading it and answering the comprehension questions. And then at the end of a story, and normally this will take probably two to three sessions to complete a story. So on average now, it is pretty much about 2 sessions. So an hour's worth of work. They would have worked through those 6 activities. They will then do what's called a tutor check. And this is another mini assessment. It's very similar to the original assessment where we will ask them to read some words. This will just be one-to-one with the tutor. But this is now the content they've been working on during this story and activity. So we're checking now again that they can read the words. And what the tutor will also do is ask them to do a quick 1-minute sort of fluency read. So they will read a short passage of the story that they will be familiar with. And again, with this, we can do this sort of words correct per minute. So we'll mark any words they get wrong. It'll only be for a minute, and we can come up with a score, which you'll see here. We also ask them a quick comprehension question. And then at the end of the story, we've got some information about their decoding accuracy. So in this case, 75%, the words they got right or wrong, and their words correct per minute. So in this case, it was 43 words correct per minute. The goal for this story is 35, so they're within that. We can see if they read any words incorrectly. And then at this point, the tutor will decide whether the pair of children or the child is ready to move on to the next story. And in this case, you probably would say yes. And they move on to the next story. And again, this is a good sort of segue for Eliza. It's this data that we've obviously got hundreds of thousands of tutor check assessments of children that are progressing through the platform. We can see how they're progressing with their fluency. Just before I finish, one exciting new thing that actually was launched this term. In the first sort of last year and the year before, almost all the tutoring happens at school. So the children are working through those 6 activities with their tutor at school. We've now launched home access, and this is proving very popular. So this allows children to practice and use the platform at home as well. So the good news, it doesn't interfere with the tutoring they're doing day in, day out. You wouldn't want one child to have sort of zoomed 3 stories ahead and one to have not done anything at all. So the story they're working on at the moment with their tutor, they work on at school, but they can go and have a look at the last 3 stories they've been working on and actually have a go at those activities at home. And the children really enjoy the sort of slightly sort of game-like way that the tutoring works and the stories, and this allows them. Clearly, it's great if the children can actually do some extra reading at home, or it might be in a before after school club or something like that. So there's a very easy way in which your teachers and tutors can just set up access for those children to use it at home. Which is great. So final bit just before I hand over to Eliza is to say there's a whole load of reports in the system for schools, and that shows you how the pupils are progressing. with their stories and their reading fluency. And you can see that at a pupil level, you can see that at a sort of a cohort level. You can look at it for disadvantaged pupils, not disadvantaged pupils. We also have reports that sort of monitor progress. So looking at their reading fluency at the start and where it is now, and being able to compare it to other children. We also convert reading fluency into a sort of reading age using some benchmarks. And so schools have got a really rich set of reports that help you have a look at how your children are doing. And what Eliza's going to do now is actually sort of zoom up a level and say, well, how are all of the children who have done tutoring in our last academic year, how does their data look when we look at the impact overall? So I hope that's been a helpful sort of getting up to speed on how the tutoring works. And Eliza, if you want to share your screen now, that should.
Okay, thanks, Paul. Let me just see if I can make this work. And I'm now hoping people can see my first slide.
That's great.
So is that okay, Paul?
That's good.
Yeah, okay, so thank you very much. So I'm gonna lead off now and just be talking for about 15-20 minutes about what is in our report and how we got there and what we've done. And I think to start, I'm just going to say that this is an analysis of what's increasingly kind of the big data in the app. So this is data that we've gathered on pupils who have done TWL last year. So that's in the academic session 2022 to 23. And we're constantly monitoring this data. So we're looking at this year's data at the moment. And we're looking and what the mechanics of tutoring, as Paul's just actually outlined in a lot of detail, is that it records this very useful data. We see where pupils are placed on the programme by the adaptive assessment. We see them move through time from simple to harder texts. And at each stage, at each text, at the end of as a part of the tutor check, we record how many words they can read accurately in a minute. So we're building this huge data set of tutored children, and that last year nearly 20,000 children took part in tutoring with the Lightning Squad. I'm just going to move to the next slide. So this is part of a, we didn't sort of set up a study, but we just started to look at the data in depth, well, I suppose about a year ago, and over the summer we kind of started to pull together, well, what does this all say? Obviously, it's part of a longer kind of research program into the impact of tutoring and the impact of tutoring with the Lightning Squad. A lot of this being funded by our charitable foundation, of which I'm a part. We decided to develop tutoring with the Lightning Squad in the UK on the basis of original randomized control trials that were done by Johns Hopkins University on an earlier version. So that's about 2017, done by the Success for All Foundation. We did a feasibility pilot study of tutoring with Alfie. That's that earlier version of tutoring with the Lightning Squad in the UK with 10 schools between 2019 and 2020. We then have had, obviously, the daily feedback we get from NTP tutors and from schools, more than 600 schools that have now used tutoring with the Lightning Squad in the UK. And for each of the pedagogy parts that you've seen within the programme, the paired reading in particular, the phonics, the repeated reading, there is a body of research. So, I guess the feeling is it should work. We know tutoring has an impact. As well as that, I think it's worth noting a couple of specific research projects. So we have an ongoing project called the APEX project, funded by the Fischer Family Foundation, where we are longitudinally tracking student performance in 10 schools. We're tracking whole cohorts, and we're looking at students who need tutoring in Key Stage 1 and who are given it, and what difference is that going to make to their Key Stage 2 experience. So we're really building a kind of a detailed picture of what does tutoring for all look like. And we have and we also have a smaller kind of current, more formally structured before and after study going on this year. And then obviously we're continuously monitoring this big data and seeing what patterns and analysis we can do. when we started looking at the data, the first thing we needed to do really was to say, well, we can see how the tutored children are doing, but what constitutes normal, and what's our benchmark for decoding, for you know, that sort of movement from simpler text and more difficult text. The benchmarking was relatively simple because these are the same stories that are used as part of our reading program, and they teach one story per week. So 5 sessions of daily tutoring, and kind of a week, would be one story. So we just take a simple 1 story per week benchmark. Deciding benchmarks for fluency is more complex and is, you know, something we're continuously looking at and refining. So when we talk about reading fluency, often that does encompass both the accuracy at which you're reading, but also the kind of the automaticity with which you're decoding more difficult and polysyllabic words, and the prosody, so your expression, reading punctuation, and that sort of, you know, the right kind of volume, and etc. But words correct per minute is a fairly standard and particularly internationally used proxy for fluency, and it's while it's complicated, because obviously you might read an easy text faster than you read a harder text, and so it is always combined with inherent text difficulty. We drew for our benchmark for the basis of this report on age-related norms, and some work that's been done in the US on more than 6 million individual pupil test scores in the first 4 years, that they do it for the first 5 years of school. Again, these are not UK benchmarks, and students in the US start school a year later, but it does look like students make around 112, 113 after 4 years of teaching. The median child has reached about 112, 113 words correct per minute. And that's a solid basis for moving forward. And so what we did as a benchmark is we smoothed that to around 0.72 words per week in a school year, taking a 39-week school year. We obviously are kind of still working on, I mean, it's really interesting to be benchmarking fluency in the UK. It hasn't been done, and now we have so many thousands of tests in our reading assessment program and in TWL that we're really looking at. Our statisticians are working on it again to keep refining these benchmarks. Taking those benchmarks, we then looked at cohorts of pupils. So while around 20,000 children did TWL, we looked at the 12,400 pupils who did at least 20 sessions of tutoring, and that gave us a stable cohort to see, well, how do they do per week? How does this cohort of pupils do per week? And what we see is very clear that when they do tutoring, that the median child in that cohort made 7.33 stories of progress after 4 weeks. So that's 20 sessions of daily tutoring. And if we compare that to a 1 story improvement per week benchmark, then they're making nearly double the progress that they would in class. And I think it's also worth noting that children who are selected for tutoring are often pupils who are a little bit stuck, so they may not be making any progress at all. And obviously, you know, we're looking at quite a lot of big data set here. And if you dug into individual stories, you see some of them have made much more progress, but we get a very strong view when we look at a very large number of pupils. We then looked at a cohort of pupils that had done 20 sessions of tutoring from the date of the first tutor check. So that's a slightly smaller cohort because you don't do your tutor check in the first session. You come in, you're assessed, and you then might do a couple of sessions doing your first story. So under NTP, which is 6 weeks of tutoring, we found a large number of those pupils will have had at least 20 sessions from the date of the first tutor check. And again, we see this kind of rapid improvement in fluency for students who take part in tutoring. And it really goes up very fast and then continues to rise. And after 4 weeks of daily tutoring, we get to 9 words. The median child has made 9 words correct per minute improvement, which is 2.25 words per week, and that's more than 3 times the benchmark of 0.72. Again, if you look at individual individual children, some of them make more than 50 words progress in that same time. But it is important that we step back and look at a very large cohort, because obviously if they started on an easier text and they ended on a harder text, it will be different from if they started on an inherently harder text and ended on an easier text. So while we find it quite difficult to look at small cohorts, at a sort of level of elevation, we see this very strong finding. And I think, again, it's worth noting that these are children who are often not making any progress at all. So they've been put on tutoring because they are stuck in their reading. Yeah, so I will now just move to the next slide. We then wanted to see students who had done more tutoring. Is it the case that you kind of improve and then it kind of levels out and you kind of complete TWL, all that you can get out of it? Or do pupils continue to make progress if you put more tutoring time in? And we think this is really interesting because obviously pupils get a certain quota of tutoring under NTP, but in reading tutoring, it's likely that they're going to need more, and to get to the expected and to kind of really develop literacy in our schools, we've now got schools who are mainstreaming TWL, working with students over much longer periods of time, and just keeping going with that. And what our initial findings show is that they sustain progress at the same rate in words correct per minute. So this smaller cohort of pupils, still more than 2,000 pupils, who had 30 sessions of tutoring, so this is more than 15 hours, they have now made 13 words correct per minute improvement as a median, which is the same, more than 3 times the progress. So they just keep going. We wanted to dig in to how different year groups do, and you can see this is our 9,000. This is our cohort of 9,000 students who are who did tutoring last year. Most of those pupils were in years 2 to 5. And you can see that they all make progress, that, you know, but the numbers are a little bit different. I think if you have a child in year 1 who is being put on tutoring, they're probably building their decoding skills before they are, before we're going to see a massive impact on their fluency. So some of this, you know, you could start to see why it might be more likely that you make that improvement in year 2. However, what we've got this year is that all the tutored children are connected through the school's MIS, and we'll be able to dig into this kind of data at a, you know, much more depth. And if I move to my last slide, which is looking at different segments of pupils, we did make an effort this year to look at, so how do all the children do as compared with, say, how do the boys do? How do the girls do? How do free school meal children do? How not free school meals send, not send, etc. And again, it was kind of encouraging to see that progress across all the different cohorts. And it wasn't that, you know, TWL is something for girls, etc. And what's good about this, again, is now that we're connected to the MIS, we'll be able to look at, for instance, how do summer-born boys do? How do summer-born free school meal boys do? So we'll be able to really look at the cohorts with much more granularity, and see how they are making progress using TWL, and how that's comparing to progress in their reading, whole cohort progress in reading. That is my final slide, so I will probably stop there and hand back to Paul, or if there are, answer any questions if there are any. Paul, is that okay?
Thanks, Eliza. That's great. Sorry, I was muting myself. That's really, really good. Thank you for sharing that data with us. And I hope for all of you, whether you're someone who's not seen tutoring with the Lightning Squad before, or whether you're a school that's using it already, just to be able to get a sense of the sort of progress that your pupils are making compared to what's happening nationally. And it is really, really encouraging that the latest data we have backs up other research that we've had previously from tutoring that shows that, you know, that 3 times accelerated rate of progress with reading fluency, you know, for a typical sort of course of tutoring under the national program over 6 weeks, 15 hours, that's going to lead to 4 to 5 months of progress with reading fluency, which is really, really strong. And those final slides that Eliza showed, that shows that actually that progress is consistent right across the age range from year 1 to year 6, and really importantly consistent across different pupil groups, boys, girls, disadvantaged, not disadvantaged, and so on. So just finally, before we close, just to sort of, I know I've had a couple of questions actually in the channel, which is always the case about funding, which is probably the more, if only we could do an impact report on funding for the National Tutoring Programme, that's probably what you need as much as the actual data. So just to remind you of where we are with the funding. We're obviously halfway through this academic year. So the funding this year from the National Tutoring Programme covers 60% of the cost. So it's essentially 60% of the cost of funding is paid for by the DFE funding that you have or are getting. Across the year, you have to contribute 40%. And so just to be absolutely clear on that if you were given, for example, £8,000 or £8,100, you can see in that example there from DFE, you would have to find the other 40%, which is 5,400. That will give you a total budget of 13,500. It is really important that you sort of make sure that match funding bit is available and don't just use the money that's being given. But it is there. It's really obviously really important for schools that money can hopefully be spent. But we all know how much pressure school budgets are under. I think the thing to sort of just make sure for this year, the funding is going to reduce next year, or the percentage is going to reduce at least. So you're going to have to put more money in next year to use your tutoring funding money than you are this year. So in some ways, it's probably more attractive to use it now if you can find the match funding, rather than potentially wait until next year. There's lots of information on the DFE website, and if you need any help sort of talking about the funding, our team can certainly help with you. But it's I think the expectation is that it does need to be spent by the end of the year. The great thing about the National Tutoring Programme this year, and it is a real positive, is you have much more flexibility to decide how you spend your funding. So that's a good thing that the government's done. I can't always say that, but that is a good thing. So whilst your funding is based on your number of disadvantaged pupils, you can actually decide who you want to give the tutoring to. So obviously the intention is that hopefully a lot of those will be the disadvantaged pupils, but actually you have complete flexibility to decide who you think should receive the tutoring. That's a very good, important thing. The idea is that children will get that sort of a basic sort of 12 to 15 hours. So it's not really the plan that you should just be doing 1 or 2 hours tutoring with a very large number of children. That actually, that said, there's not going to be a huge amount of monitoring there. So I think you've got flexibility, particularly as you're coming towards the end of the year. If you've got some funding and you think you can only get 7 or 8 hours tutoring for a child, well, that's clearly better than that funding not being spent. So do think about that. You have flexibility to deliver tutoring to groups of up to 6 now, which is much more flexible than last year. And you've seen from FFT's programme, it works very well, for example, with 3 pairs of students working on 3 laptops, supervised by a teaching assistant or a tutor, can be a very effective, cost-effective way of delivering tutoring. And as I said earlier, I think the academic mentor is probably past now if you haven't got one of those, but I think you have flexibility to use your in-school staff. You know, if you've got a teaching assistant or someone you can find who could deliver the tutoring, that's great. You can use the funding for that. And obviously, if you haven't got resource and you need an external partner, you can get someone in, and we can certainly help with that. We have tutors that can come in and do that. Just finally, just the way, if you're interested, the way the pricing works for our tutoring program is that it's just an annual subscription, but it's unlimited access and unlimited use then. So I'll put the prices up here. So it's just simply based on the size of your school. So, you know, if there's a requirement that actually probably 20% of your children are perhaps behind with reading, which it is nationally, it's actually slightly more than that nationally, certainly at some key stages, you can see there that it's a pretty cost-effective intervention for the platform and the subscription. So if you're a one-form entry school, it will be around £25 per pupil if you used it for 20% of your lowest attaining pupils for reading. Obviously, on top of that, if you want an FFT tutor to come in, that's just based on a block. Again, there is a bit more flexibility on that as we come towards the end of the year. If you want an FFT tutor in for 4 weeks rather than 6 weeks, we would obviously pro rata that cost there. So please do get in touch if you're interested in that. I'll put the contact details up there. We'll be very happy to talk to you if both about the impact that Eliza has shared with you today, and also if you're interested in more tutoring or interested in doing some tutoring for the first time. So I think we've pretty much got to the end. I know there've been a couple of questions that have come in. I know
there's another question there, Paul, which is data collected from reading completed at home?
Yeah, so I think I'm be careful what I say here. I'm pretty sure it is. It's certainly not in the report that Eliza, or the data that Eliza has shared with you today. It'll be sort of collected slightly separately, because in some ways children, it won't necessarily, we're not doing the tutor check at home at the moment. So in some ways we're you know, the children are just working through the activities in their own time. They might choose to spend all their time on spelling or all their time on one or two particular activities, which is great. You know, they've got a bit more flexibility. I guess it'll be interesting. We could certainly look at whether the children who do significant home access make even faster progress with their reading when we do those tutor check assessments. So that will be certainly something we'll start to look at with the data now. So the answer is sort of, you know, yes and no, really. We're not doing lots of assessments at home, but we are tracking what they're doing. We can see whether they're using it, which activities they're using. We do get some data from the activities, and then it'll be great to see what that looks like in the sort of tutor checks. So good. Unless there are any other questions, I think we'll leave that there. I hope that's been a useful session. Please do get in touch with us if you've got any questions. We'll certainly, as I say, send out the slides, a copy of the recording, and also a link to the report. And as Eliza said, this is very much a start of a journey of us sort of publishing more and more data about the impacts of our tutoring. I think we're in a really fortunate position to have so many children using our program, and that allows us, with FFT sort of expertise in analysing data, that you know, we certainly are really committed to looking at that data and trying to understand what it can tell us. There's a whole heap of data that we haven't even sort of touched on today. For example, data about which words children find harder or easier to read or to spell, which GPCs children find harder to sound out. So there's a lot of sort of granular data that will be interesting to look at as well. So thank you very much. I know there was, I think there was one colleague who's just asking for a question about an individual thing. Please do. I think Alia and Ruth, who are both in our tutoring support team, you're being bombarded with responses there. So do get in touch with them. They'll get in touch with you. Thank you very much. Please have a good day, and thank you for joining us today. And we hope to see you again at a session in the future. Thank you.